Lake George, a quiet resort town in upstate New York. In the summer of 2025, this place shimmered with sunlight, its waters as still as glass, a sanctuary for families on vacation. But on the night of the 19th of July, that stillness shattered. A report came in that chilled the entire region. A 9-year-old Canadian girl had vanished without a trace during a trip with her father. Her name was Melina Frattolin, brown hair, bright smile. Her father, Luciano Frattolin, a wealthy entrepreneur from Montreal, called the police and described a harrowing scene. He had stopped his car briefly to use the bathroom, and when he returned, his daughter was gone, allegedly taken by 2 unknown men in a white vehicle. An Amber Alert was issued across New York State. Police combed every corner of Saratoga Springs and nearby towns. Residents shared Melina's photo across social media. News outlets ran with headlines, "Child abduction paralyzes tourist area." But less than 24 hours later, the story changed entirely. Melina's body was discovered in a shallow pond near Ticonderoga, nearly 30 miles from where she was last seen. Hidden under a fallen tree, her body bore no visible trauma, only silence. A silence that concealed not just death, but deception. And the man who claimed she was the light of his life was now the only suspect. Shortly after Luciano Frattolin reported his daughter's disappearance on the night of the 19th of July, law enforcement mobilized swiftly. This was no ordinary missing person case. A child, a foreign national, potentially abducted in a high-profile tourist area. Every second mattered. An Amber Alert went out early on the 20th of July. Highway signs lit up with descriptions. Checkpoints were established. The public was asked to help locate a 2024 gray Toyota Prius, the car Frattolin was driving during the trip. But as investigators reviewed traffic cameras and location data from the Interstate 87 corridor, something didn't add up. There was no evidence of another vehicle matching Frattolin's abduction story. No eyewitnesses. No suspicious activity caught on nearby surveillance. Even more concerning, the timeline he gave didn't match any physical movement of vehicles or people in the area. Authorities retraced the pair's movements. Hotel records showed the father and daughter left their lodging in Lake George on the morning of the 19th of July. By 5:30 p.m., they were spotted in Saratoga Springs, where Melina made a brief phone call to her mother. According to the mother, Melina sounded normal, happy, not distressed. That call was the last confirmed moment anyone heard Melina's voice. After that, she vanished from all footage. Meanwhile, Luciano's Prius began moving north away from populated areas toward the wilderness near Ticonderoga. This is the very region where her body was found the next day. Investigators asked Frattolin, why was he driving 30 miles into rural backroads late at night? Why was there no trace of the so-called abductors? Why were there multiple GPS inconsistencies? His answers were vague. He repeated himself, "I don't know. I was looking for her." But the things he claimed not to know aligned far too well with the very evidence he was trying to bury. That shallow pond, hidden beneath overgrown brush, with a child's body tucked under a tree trunk, wasn't found by chance. It was found because it had been chosen. And from that moment forward, this case stopped being a kidnapping investigation. It became a hunt for the father. On the morning of the 20th of July, as sunlight filtered through the trees near a remote pond in Ticonderoga, New York, search teams noticed something strange. A light-colored fabric snagged beneath a rotting tree trunk. As they stepped closer, they realized it was part of a dress. And beneath the trunk, partially submerged in the shallow, murky water, was the lifeless body of Melina. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, but there was intention, a deliberate attempt to hide her. The preliminary autopsy confirmed what no one wanted to hear. Melina had died from asphyxia due to drowning. But what stopped the investigators wasn't just the cause of death, it was how carefully the body had been placed, out of plain sight, away from casual discovery, as if someone had planned to keep the secret submerged forever. That's when Frattolin's history began to unravel. Despite his media-friendly image, a soft-spoken entrepreneur who loved his daughter Frattolin had spent the past few years locked in a custody battle with Melina's mother. The mother, who had full custody, had opposed the vacation, but Frattolin insisted, promising it would be safe and brief. He even signed a written agreement, but on Frattolin's laptop, police discovered search history that painted a darker picture. Maps of remote ponds near Lake George. Google searches like, "How deep does a body sink?" Queries about cell phone tracking and visibility in shallow water. Melina's phone, which last pinged near the pond around 6:45 p.m. on the 19th of July, had been switched off minutes later. For nearly 3 hours, Luciano drove through the wilderness, not calling anyone, not reporting her missing until 9:58 p.m., when he finally contacted police and claimed an abduction had occurred just moments before. Everything, the timing, the distance, the lack of evidence for his story began to point in a single direction. Frattolin wasn't a grieving father searching for his daughter. He was a man weaving a narrative to cover a crime already committed. And no matter how carefully he tried to stitch that story together, the gaps were widening and they were starting to swallow him whole. On the 21st of July, just 2 days after Melina's body was discovered, Luciano Frattolin was arrested without incident at the Lake George motel where he had been staying. The man who once stood before cameras pleading for help was now in handcuffs, silent, composed, and stone-faced. Police executed a search warrant on his gray Toyota Prius. What they found solidified their suspicions. The undercarriage bore traces of mud consistent with the pond in Ticonderoga. The rear bumper had scratches, as though something had been dragged. Inside the vehicle, officers discovered a chlorine-scented wet towel, a length of rope, and fibers matching the clothes Melina had worn the day she vanished. When interrogated at the Essex County Sheriff's Office, Frattolin clung to his original story. "I left the car for a moment. When I came back, she was gone." But this time, detectives weren't asking questions. They were laying out evidence, time-stamped traffic footage, location data from Melina's phone, and forensic findings from the car and the crime scene. That afternoon, the district attorney filed 2 felony charges against him: second-degree murder for the alleged intentional killing of Melina without premeditation, concealment of a human corpse for the deliberate disposal and attempted hiding of her body. Frattolin was denied bail and transferred to Essex County Jail under suicide watch. The arrest made international headlines. Canadian businessman kills daughter during U.S. vacation. Father who called daughter his light now faces darkness of his own. The most jarring irony? Frattolin had long branded himself as a family man, often sharing photos of Melina with poetic captions. Now, those same photos were being circulated in news reports not as tributes, but as evidence of betrayal. His preliminary court appearance was scheduled for the 25th of July at Ticonderoga Town Court, where for the first time, he would have to face the charges in front of a judge, the public, and, in a cruel twist, the very image of the daughter he claimed to cherish. Ticonderoga Town Court, nestled in the quiet hills of Essex County, turned into a media epicenter on the morning of the 25th of July. At 9 a.m., Luciano Frattolin entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, his expression unreadable. Reporters from both the U.S. and Canada filled the benches. Locals, who had never seen a murder trial, came early, not out of curiosity but disbelief. A father, a child, a vacation, and a death. The prosecution opened with a stark narrative. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Corbin methodically laid out a sequence of facts: the inconsistencies in Frattolin's statements, the GPS data from his vehicle, the forensic evidence from the pond, and most damning, the preliminary autopsy. The medical examiner testified that Melina's cause of death was asphyxia due to drowning, but with a critical caveat: her lungs were not fully filled with water, and there were signs of compression around her neck. According to the coroner, this suggested she was already unconscious or restrained before entering the water. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a deliberate act. The defense, led by veteran attorney Patrick Lewis, countered with calm defiance. "My client is a father, a grieving man. There are no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, and no definitive moment that proves his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." Lewis floated an alternative theory. that Melina may have wandered off on her own after her father briefly left the vehicle, that she could have fallen, become disoriented, and drowned. "We do not convict on suggestion," he said. "We convict on proof." But that suggestion unraveled quickly. The prosecution introduced a previously unreleased video clip captured by a passing car's dashcam. It showed Frattolin's Prius turning off a main road onto a secluded path leading directly to the pond at approximately 7:36 p.m., over 2 hours before he reported Melina missing. Another key witness, a forensic analyst, testified that Melina's cell phone was disabled minutes after the car arrived at that location, and surveillance from a highway toll booth showed the Prius returning to town at 9:20 p.m. with only one occupant. Throughout the proceedings, Frattolin sat still, no emotion, no reaction. In the back row, Melina's mother, who had traveled quietly from Montreal, clutched a framed photo of her daughter in a school uniform. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she didn't need to. One of the final statements came from the prosecutor, delivered not with anger, but with a kind of solemn clarity. This wasn't a father who lost his daughter. This was a man who couldn't bear not to possess her. And so, when he could no longer control her life, he took it. No outbursts followed, just the suffocating silence of a courtroom filled with people who now saw the story for what it was, not a mystery, but a tragedy authored by the very man who claimed to protect her. On the 29th of July, after 4 days of hearings, testimony, and quietly mounting tension, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Luciano Frattolin was guilty on all counts. Convicted of second-degree murder and concealment of a human corpse, he now faced a sentence of 25 years to life without parole. The judge delayed formal sentencing until mid-August to allow for victim impact statements and further psychological evaluations, but the legal conclusion was clear. When asked if he had anything to say before the verdict was read, Frattolin stood, looked toward the gallery, and muttered, "I didn't kill my daughter. I don't know what happened." No one in the courtroom stirred. No one believed him anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in the summer heat, waiting for a reaction. But there were none. Melina's mother, veiled and silent, left through a side door. Her attorney read a statement on her behalf. "No sentence will bring my daughter back. But at least now, the truth sits where it belongs in the open." Public discourse surrounding the case grew louder. Was this a moment of justice, or just the formal close of something that should never have happened in the first place? Mental health experts pointed out the chilling premeditation in Frattolin's online searches. Children's rights advocates questioned why a man with a documented history of parental threats had been granted unsupervised access to his child across an international border. Legal scholars called it a systemic failure, one that allowed a young girl to vanish, not in the shadows, but in plain sight. Lake George, once the backdrop of serene family vacations, would now carry a darker name in memory. The pond where Melina was found remained untouched, cordoned off indefinitely, not for safety, but out of reverence. In one reporter's words, "Justice may have been served, but what it feeds can never fill the space where Melina once laughed." Luciano Frattolin wasn't a transient stranger. He wasn't a man lost to drugs or violence. He was a businessman, the founder of Gambella Coffee in Montreal, a public figure who spoke about entrepreneurship, work-life balance, and fatherhood. He often posted photos of his daughter Melina, accompanied by captions like, "She's the light that keeps my heart beating." So how does a man like that become the prime suspect in his own child's death? According to forensic psychologists brought in after the trial, Frattolin may have suffered from obsessive-possessive delusions, a state in which the boundary between love and control dissolves. When people in this psychological condition feel they are losing the person they love, they may act with finality in an effort to preserve that connection permanently, even if it means ending it. In court documents and prior custody disputes, Frattolin had exhibited worrying patterns, sending threatening emails to his ex-wife, making veiled suggestions that, "If I can't have her, no one will," and manipulating Melina emotionally during visits. These were dismissed at the time as signs of stress, not red flags. Now they read like portents. Child welfare advocates were quick to criticize both the Canadian and U.S. systems for allowing an unsupervised, cross-border custody exchange without deeper scrutiny. The tragic irony is that the very system meant to protect Melina, the courts, may have helped enable her final hours. But even as the justice system moved on, one question refused to die. Was this preventable? Yes, there were signs. Yes, warnings were given, but they were buried beneath legal formalities and court protocols. A checkbox here, a signature there, and a 9-year-old girl was allowed to travel alone with a father already showing signs of instability. In the final hearing, as the court recessed and Frattolin was led out in cuffs, one official whispered, almost like a prayer, "Sometimes we catch monsters, and sometimes we only catch the pieces they leave behind." There will be other cases, other names, other families shattered by unseen cracks in the system. But Melina's name, now etched into legal records and news headlines, might echo just long enough to force change. And maybe, just maybe, that echo will be loud enough to stop the next silence before it begins.